Hello, everybody, and welcome to the JavaScript Marathon, the first ever JavaScript Marathon here. This first session is 1 hour to learn React, and I'm super happy and super eager to share this with you. We'll start out with a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll dive right in. First, a little bit to introduce myself. My name is Rob Osell. I'm a software architect here at this.labs. You can find me on Twitter at RoboCell, so it's just my name spelled very poorly, and I always wish I could get my original name back, but there it is. So we just wanted to let you know that here at this we do corporate training, so if you find yourself needing to keep up with the constantly evolving technologies, and if you find that a struggle, if you want to bring your team up to speed on the latest technologies, this.labs offers personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. So contact us here at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment, if that's something that interests you. As I just mentioned, our sponsor today is this.labs. They're your partners in modern digital transformation, specialize in mentorship, consulting, training, and staff augmentation for enterprise organizations. You can find out more at this.labs.com or send us an email at hi@this.co. Hello, everybody from all over the world. Thank you so much for joining us. So 1 hour to learn React, that's not a lot of time, everybody. 1 hour to learn anything is not a lot of time, but we're going to do our best today. So to start out, let's just set out some goals. What are we trying to do today? Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to try and build a React application, a very basic one using standard tooling. What I'm going to call standard tooling is going to be Create React App. We're going to use JSX. We're going to use hooks today and the fetch API for contacting some backend stuff. We're going to go over components, what those are in React, and props, and all the various parts of components. We're going to talk about state. Now, we're not going to talk about Redux or state management, but near the end, we're actually going to approach concepts similar to that. Okay, if you have any questions about any stuff like this, please feel free to ask that along the way. So as I mentioned, we are going to discuss hooks, things like useState, useEffect, useReducer. Now, in this session, we're not going to get into the really complex stuff. We're not going to talk about useMemo or useRef and things like that. Not in this session, but in future sessions, certainly we can look at something like that. We're going to talk about accessing APIs, and we're going to build up and refactor a sample application. And in honor of me being a father and this being April Fool's Day, we're going to make a virtual briefcase that holds dad jokes. And our goal is going to be to unlock it and reveal the dad jokes. Now, before we get too deeply into this, I want to do a little bit of a preamble. And this preamble is about the topic of the best way to learn. Okay, a lot of people have strong feelings about whether it's best to learn web development via frameworks or via the platform first. Okay, know that I acknowledge this disagreement. I know that there are good arguments on both sides of that, but here we believe in the power of frameworks to really hide the complexities of modern web development while enabling people to build really cool stuff. Okay, let's just agree that web development is really hard. It's very easy to get overwhelmed. There's a lot of things, accessibility, performance, responsive design. There's a lot to do. And frameworks and things similar to it can take a lot of that complexity away from you and enable you to just build cool things right away. That's why we love frameworks. That's why we like to teach frameworks, maybe not absolutely first, but we like to teach frameworks very early on. It's helped a lot of us get up to speed quickly in web development. But if you disagree and you think that people should be learning, the platform first and vanilla JavaScript first, that's fine. And that's totally cool. But here we're going to do frameworks. I know other people also have feelings about learning React in its purest form, starting with just a simple source tag inside of a script tag inside of your index HTML, using React create element, no build system, no JSX, just get all the way down to the basics and build up. Again, I respect and acknowledge this opinion, but in a 1 hour course, we just don't have enough time to start that low level. So we're going to jump a couple steps ahead and just begin with the meat of the framework. There's a lot of other training resources out there, though, that do start at a very, very basic level. So if you have any questions or if you want to see this presented in a different way, there's tons of stuff out there. So what is React? Interestingly, React calls itself a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, which is what the most interesting or the most informative description ever. Not. It is a tool for efficiently mapping the state of our application, the sort of interesting things about our application that make it different from other versions of our application, to a minimal set of DOM operations, right? So what we want to do is we want to build websites, and those websites are going to have something dynamic about them. They're going to be differently laid out. We can't know ahead of time exactly how the page will lay out. And as those things continue to change, React is just a really good tool for mapping those changes to changes on the actual page, the DOM meaning the elements on the actual page. So the components we're going to build, the code we're going to write in React is going to describe how to map those state changes and those behavior changes, the things that the users are doing, to HTML or a HTML-like syntax. And then React is going to figure out how to get that onto the page as efficiently as possible. It's really cool how it works. So why would we use React, or why should anybody use React? Why should you be here considering using React? Well, let's say, for example, you have a lot of dynamic content on your site. You're doing a lot of data fetching from APIs, a lot of conditional loading, so things might disappear or appear based on what's going on. There might be a lot of animations or a lot of interaction or a lot of movement, a lot of that dynamic content on your page, dynamic in all senses of the word. That's a great use for a framework like React. Or you might have just a lot of reuse of code across your application. Even if you don't want to use a dynamic application at all, if you just want to leverage the reuse powers of components, you have that with React. It gives you a powerful and flexible toolkit for building dynamic applications. So again, it's just about extending your powers. It's about giving you those superpowers. You might use it because there's a lot of third-party libraries for doing powerful and cool things, right? So a lot of people like that part of it, is that they can go out and find libraries that can do other things that are difficult, but that does them for them. All sorts of animation libraries and graphing libraries that interact with React. There's a lot of tooling to get performance, accessibility, and cheap other things for free, right? Things like Reach UI and Reach Router, tools like that really help you, again, do things that are difficult much more simply, and they hook into React. Again, React can hide a lot of complexity for beginners, although some people might argue that it has some complexities of its own. And then there's just a lot of training resources. This is a great framework to get into just because there are so many trainers in React, and we just really love to see that, because when you're trying to pick something up, those training resources are so critical, and there's a ton of it in React. So reasons why people say you shouldn't use React. For example, some people say, not every site needs to be dynamic, and nor should every site need JavaScript. Some people think that JSX could be a little tricky. Some people cite interop issues with web components and custom elements. But I just want to say that with all of these things, there are ways to work around it with React, right? You can server render, which means like statically render. So you can execute your React app and use it only to generate static, normal HTML and CSS. That's totally possible in React. You don't have to use its dynamic qualities. You don't even have to include the React framework when it gets downloaded onto your site if you're not going to use any of the live action, sort of automatic updating features in your code. So there are reasons not to use React, but it is a lot of fun to play with, and it is extremely powerful, and you can build a ton of really interesting sites with it. That's why we think it's cool to get into. Okay, so that's it for an introduction. And what I'm going to do, yeah, Reach Router and React Router merging in latest versions, that's absolutely true. I actually am probably speaking imprecisely over which one won. I guess it is React Router has merged in. Has reabsorbed Reach Router. Okay, so we will switch over and start looking at some actual coding things. So just give me one moment as I make some changes here. And what we're going to start out with is we're going to actually start out with looking at Create React App and the ways that you're going to get these websites actually building, or at least scaffolded and set up on your system. So the first thing that you're going to want to do, or at least the first thing that you can do, is you want to install the Create React App CLI. Now, in the absolute latest versions, actually, you can do this right from the command line with npx, assuming that you have npx support in the version of Node and npm that you're using. But I want to, or at least the way that I'm going to do it here, is just going to install Create React App, the CLI for building React sites globally. Okay, so to do that, we're going to do npm -i. You can do this with Yarn as well. I know a lot of people in the React community use Yarn. I still just use npm, but you can use whichever tool you want. npm I, which is install globally Create React App. Okay, once you've done that, then we can do this command, Create React App, and then we can just call it my sample app and hit enter, and voila. Create React App is building up an entire website for us, or at least the scaffolding for a website for us. It's downloading a lot of packages, it's installing it, it's doing a lot of really cool things. It's setting up your build process, your testing process, and all the related things that you'll need, and you don't have to worry about it. What'll come of that and I have it built already in a different browser. But what'll come about is something that looks like this. So this is the basic the basic structure of a Create React app. And so in the structure of this React app, okay, it might look like there's a lot here and that it's very confusing, but you don't have to be intimidated by it, okay? At least up front, there's not going to be a lot of things that we necessarily have to do and not a lot of things that we necessarily have to interact with, okay? So we don't have to know about this robots.txt. We don't have to know about these logos or this manifest or this service worker, okay? These are things that when you get to a sufficiently advanced level, you can certainly bring these things online, but you don't have to do these things you don't have to understand these tools in order to move forward, okay? The things that we want to look at here are the index.html, which is kind of interesting because this index.html is kind of managed by Create React App, and it'll kind of fill in some stuff for us as part of our build process, but you can certainly augment this. What I want to point out in this index.html file, first of all, is that it's just a normal index.html file. This is just HTML, plus or minus some things. That'll be built with the build process, but essentially this is just HTML. And what it is going to create is basically this one div that gets an ID of root. The ID of root isn't magical. It's a convention. It's typical, but it's not magical. It doesn't have to be called root. We could change this to something else. That's fine. But what's interesting is that this is going to be the place that we're going to host our React application into. So we're going to pick a spot on our page, and we're going to put a React application into this spot, okay? So this is our index.html file. Then we go to our index.js file. This is the entry point to our React code. This is our actual application itself, okay? And what you need to see here is, again, this file was automatically generated by Create React App, and you can see that it's generating this component called app, which is, again, a convention. It's not magical. We could import anything we want here and put it into this, or nothing at all. Wouldn't be a very interesting app if there was nothing at all, but we can certainly do it. And where it's going to put that thing is it's going to put it in the document on the element identified by root. So this is how we identified it. So if we wanted to call it something other than root, we certainly have that opportunity to do that. Here we're going root, and we're going to put app in root, okay? This is, again, just convention. Usually you don't even have to mess with this file. But this is where the magic starts to happen. So this is our very first component that we're given by the Create React App. And they do this just to give you some sample things so that when you first execute a brand new application, you actually have the opportunity to see something. And I apologize for a little bit of the noise in the background. As we are all quarantined, I have a child that is refusing to nap upstairs. But this default code that we have here in our application is just giving us some information. This is just what they give us to play around with. There's, again, nothing important here. We could delete all of this, okay? So this is basically where we start with Create React App. This is what we have. And if we were to actually execute this, we would see a logo and some text that would appear therefrom, okay? Now, I'm going to jump into a different repository that I've previously made that we're going to start coding from. But before I do that, I want to make one other reference, and then we're going to get started in earnest in actually coding. And what I want to do is I want to point people to Code Sandbox. So if you are sitting here and you are almost completely brand new and you don't have a terminal, or maybe you're on a Windows machine and you're struggling with figuring that out, or you don't have NPM installed, or you don't even know what that meant, you don't know how to install things globally or run npx, that's fine also. Code Sandbox, codesandbox.io, is a really cool website that lets you do almost all of the things that you can do with the technology that I stated directly from your web browser. This includes being able to scaffold a brand new React application using basically a Create React App template. Then you can hook it up to a GitHub account and deploy it and manage it with source control with Git, and then even deploy it to sites like Netlify or GitHub Pages or anything along those lines. So if you want to follow along with this and you don't already have a setup for this going or installed on your machine, feel free to fire something up in Code Sandbox, and then you can feel free to follow along exactly as we're doing, and you should be mostly fine. But this is a really cool way for people to get into using React without having to install all of the tooling. You can dive right in here. Okay, so now let me set up what we're going to do here. And I have our application. So here's where we are starting. So we're starting with basically a Create React App template. The only difference here, I'm cheating only but slightly. I've included just a couple of CSS helpers that I'm going to use later just to be able to get some styling going. And then I have included some, I mean, I've already done some work here in case I need to cheat and copy some code in case I get stuck, which is just a live coding tip for anybody that's going to do live coding presentations. But otherwise, everything is default, okay? All I've done is I've taken the app.js file and emptied it out of everything, okay? So this is just a completely empty app file. Originally, this had that logo and that text in it, and I've just cleaned it out and I've returned null. And if we look at what that's giving us, this code is already running. We see that it's blank, which means that we are good to go. Now, there is one more thing that I wanted to do before we actually get started, and that is, we're going to start talking about how we can, just do anything that we want and get it to show up on screen, okay? But as I'm starting to introduce the concepts of JSX and React in particular, I just don't want you guys to think that there's anything magical going on. So I just want you all to know that React really is just built on the foundation of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And so I wanted to show that by way of looking at CSS Zen Garden. So I don't know if anybody's familiar with CSS Zen Garden, but it's this really cool website where you can download the HTML file and the basic CSS file, and then people compete and like to show off how fancy they can make this site look with the same HTML file and editing, I think, the CSS file. I think that's the part that they edit. But regardless, you get a baseline HTML and a baseline CSS file. Now, what I wanted to show is that I have taken those things, those files, and put them into React specifically. So this is the exact CSS file that you would get from CSS Zen Garden. I've made no changes to it. This is the exact CSS file that you get. This is the almost exact HTML file, except I had to wrap it in a React component to get it to appear on the screen. This little thing is a fragment, which we'll talk about in the future, but for now, that's a little bit extra, but it's not magical. And this is the exact HTML as it was given to me. One exception, which again we'll talk about, is that any place where the original HTML said class, I have now changed it to say class name. That is, again, something that we will talk about with React, but that is the only change. Otherwise, it's the exact same HTML, the exact same CSS. Enough of me saying the exact same. Let me show you what this looks like. Boom. So this is the HTML, the CSS Zen Garden site, right? So this is meant to show you that if you wanted to, you could just build a completely vanilla HTML site with vanilla CSS and be completely fine in React. Now, is that terribly interesting? Would you need to use React to do something like that? No. But I want you to know that you don't have to feel like you're giving up on learning HTML or giving up on learning CSS just to participate and use React. You don't have to. And in fact, some of the best React applications are the ones that do respect the fact that it's built on top of HTML and built on top of CSS. And they are mindful of that and mindful of using semantic HTML, accessible HTML, and proper styles and proper style leading. So that was just a quick aside to show that there really is nothing, quote unquote, magical about React. It really is just built on the principles of the web. Okay, so here we go. We have our application, and this is where we're building. So when we're building a React component is just a function. Now, if you've been doing React for a little while, or you've looked at some older documentation, you might have heard about class-based components. That is true. These are generally not recommended now, and we're not going to cover them here. So for the purposes of this, all React components are going to be functions. And what do those functions return? Those functions return what appears to be HTML, but is actually called JSX. Okay, JSX is an HTML-like syntax. Okay, it's not HTML. If you look at the documentation, they're very specific about this. It's not HTML. It's not a string. It's not exactly templating. But what it is it's a syntax that's meant to feel like HTML, imitate HTML. It's certainly compatible with HTML in most cases. But what this actually compiles down to are commands to react to things like React Create Elements. And again, that's not what we're covering today, but just know that this looks like HTML. It is called JSX. And what the computer does, what the machine does, what your build does, is actually compile this down into calls to a different piece of code. But for our intents and purposes, we can sort of treat this like we're just writing some HTML in a template. Okay. So we're going to start, and what we're going to do is we need to have, our components need to have one base element. And this base element we're going to have is going to be a section, and it's going to have a title, hello world. And we're going to build a button here, and the button is going to say, press me. Okay, and again, as we save, you see stuff is just automatically updating over here on the right, which is great. That's what we like to see. Things are working. And we can make this a little bigger. Now remember, what we're building today is a lockbox, a password operated lockbox, like a briefcase that's going to unlock some jokes, okay? But I'm still just showing us that we can build whatever we want. So if we want to put a input of type number, we can do that, okay? And it's just going to appear because, again, HTML or React is just built on top of HTML. So what do we want to do? Well, in our application, our suitcase is going to have 3 keys, 3 combinations, 3 numbers on it. So we're going to have 3 inputs here of type number. And then we're going to take a div here, and this is just to wrap these 3 things. And what I want to do here is I want to display these as flex. So I'm going to put in a style attribute, right? So this isn't so weird, but we're going to introduce our first weird syntax. Pardon me while I take a drink. Okay, we're going to introduce our first odd syntax for most people. We're not putting quotes here. We're putting these braces. These braces are basically telling React to treat this as a piece of JavaScript that needs to be evaluated before its value is put into place here, okay? So we are about to tell React, we are going to write some code, and we want you to evaluate that code and assign it to the style property, style attribute. Now, this is one of the places where React is a little bit different than HTML. What we assign here isn't a string, but what we assign here is actually an object. And the object will take the keys of CSS properties that can be set on this element, and then takes strings which define the results. So here we're going to do a display of flex, and this is going to do an inline style of display flex on this div. And we should see things change a little bit. Okay, great. So this is our application. We're done. We did it. Not quite. We're not quite done. The next thing that we want to do is start talking about state, because if we're going to do a combination, then we need to know and tie these to values, right? I mean, like right now, I can spin this lock, and I can say, okay, that that's that, and then there's like a 3, and okay, I've got some numbers here. Hey, everybody. Hey, Marion. And this is great, but how do I know what numbers are put in there, and how do I know what numbers I want to be put in there? This starts to introduce this concept of state. State is so important to all our applications. It's not just a React thing. It's not just a frameworks thing. All of the web is about this. For example, the fact that this input box even knows what number is stored in it, it has implicit state. It has some inherent state, which is some knowledge about what is typed in here that makes it different from this input box, right? The fact that this input box is set to 4 and this input box is set to 2, they are otherwise identical as input boxes, but the state is the thing that makes the 2 input boxes different, and that state in this case is the value that's stored inside of it. So what we want to do when we want to store some state inside of our application is we're going to use a hook, a React hook. And React hooks are just sort of like utilities. We can think of them as utilities that we use to build components. It can get much more complex description than that, but we're going to use them as if they're utilities. So first we need to import it. So we're going to import the use state syntax, or the use state hook from the React library. And the syntax for that is we're going to say let, so we're going to define a variable. That variable is actually going to be an array. Now, you could theoretically do like, an array equals use state. You can kind of do that, but the strong convention, and I wouldn't violate this because people will build linting rules that will guard against this, is that we're going to dereference this array that is returned from use state. And the first value from it is going to be the piece of state itself, the data that we're saving. And the second value of the array is going to be an operation that is going to allow us to change that state. So we're going to get the actual piece of state itself, the current value of this piece of state, and then we're going to get an operator which will let us change the state, okay? And then we use the useState operator, and we give it a default value. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to put an array in here, okay? I'm going to put an array that has 3 digits in there. And so now we have some state in our application. Now, interestingly, that state isn't doing anything yet, so we're going to fix that. So now, in order to make our application do interesting things, we're going to start pushing the state and actually causing the state to change the appearance of the UI. Because right now, it's not, right now that state isn't doing anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the value of each of these inputs to something particular. And in this case, what we're going to do is set the value to one of the digits. So here we'll say that it'll be digits 0, the first element in the digits array. And then we will copy this and paste and paste. And then here we're going to do digits 1 and digits 2. Now, if we do this, I should hope that we'll see 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 here inside of our inputs, and we do see that. And if I was to change this state, now it's going to reflect a different output, right? So this is the key idea of state. As I change my state, what is output as HTML, as DOM on the screen is different. Now, in this case, I had to actually go into the code and change the state myself to get it to update on the page. Now, that's not necessarily something that we want to have to always do. So we're going to start changing that, okay? So to change that, let's introduce, let's talk about how to handle events. So you might notice down here this error said that we were providing a value prop to a form field. A prop is like a property. It means like this, right? Value and type. We were putting a value prop to a form field without an onChange handler. This will make the field read only. So we're going to change that. We want to actually listen to this, this input being edited. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an onChange. We're going to hook into the onChange prop. Now, you might have noticed that this is yet another change from HTML, right? The event names on HTML elements are subtly different than React. In some cases, maybe more strongly different, but they are different. So if you know that a certain event exists on an HTML element, but you're not sure what it is in React, it's a simple thing to Google. There's tons of documentation about this. It is one of the things I most frequently look up when I look up React information as well. So don't feel ashamed if you have to look up that kind of stuff. It is not trivial. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to take a method, and we're going to make an arrow method or an unnamed method or a lambda expression or whatever you want to call it. And at first, we're just going to do nothing. But know that it takes an event, okay? So we know that it takes an event. And what we know is that we need to take that event, that change of this property, and we need to actually get that value into the store. So what we need is maybe a method here, which I'm going to call setDigitAtIndex, which is going to be a method that's going to take a digit and an index, and it's going to take this function. And what I need to do is I just need to do a little bit of magic on editing an array. And I apologize I couldn't make this example even simpler. I kind of got stuck with this array of digits, and I kind of fell in love with the approach here, but it is a little messy here. Yep, an arrow function, for sure. Use a lot of arrow functions, or I tend to use a lot of arrow functions, especially when I'm defining things in React like this. To be perfectly honest, I'm not great at speaking at too much of the differences. There are issues and potential optimizations about performance, but certainly at the level that we're at, we're totally fine doing what we're doing. So we know ultimately what we're going to do in this method is called setDigits. That's because that's the property we need to use, or that's the function we need to use to actually update the state. But what do we need to do? Well, we need to pass into setDigits exactly the shape of digits, which is an array of numbers. So we know we need an array. Now, how would we do this? What I'm going to say is that this is what we're going to do. A little bit of magic. Current digits dot slice 0 to index. Then we're going to take the digit, and then we're going to take current digits dot slice index plus 1 to the end of the array. Oh yeah, okay. well, realistically, we're going to do digits here, but I'm going to get to why this is current digits. Okay, so if we did digits here, which is this digits, one step ahead of myself, sorry. So if we do digits here, which is this state variable, you're going to end up having a problem in the future, potentially, where because this new state value depends on this old state value, we really need to be mindful of that, because it's possible due to stale closures, that's the name, but the fact that it can kind of like hold on to older versions of the data, and so it doesn't always do exactly what you expect it to do. So what these set functions take is they'll either take just the value itself, which is what we're doing here, and you do that when the new value doesn't depend on the old value. But if the new value depends on the old value, which it does here because we're editing an array, or at least we're creating a new array from the old array, we actually can pass in an argument, a method, to this set digits function, and it will give us back the current value of the state, which is guaranteed to be the current value of the state when this is evaluated. It's a bit interesting in React that they try to do a lot of performance optimizations for you, where when you call set state or set digits or set anything on any of your state variables, it doesn't like immediately go set it and immediately re-render before the next line of code goes off. It basically queues up these calls, and then it decides intelligently when is a good time to go and update that state, and then to make those changes either in a batch or individually or do whatever it wants. And so we give React the power to do what it thinks is most performant, and in exchange for that, we just make sure that we set up the proper guardrails to not cause any particular issues. So in this case, we're going to call this method to set digits. It's going to return back current digits. We're going to do this. So what this is saying is I want to take all the values of this array up until the one I want to change. Then I want to do the new value. And then I want to put any digits afterwards that exist into the array. So basically, we're just swapping one value out of the array and creating a new array. OK? So we have this set digit at index. So now what do? We come down here, and we have this event. And we know that we want to call set digit at index. And the first value is going to be the digit, which is going to be event.target.value. So event is the event that's being triggered by the change. Its target is the actual input box. So this is kind of built into the built-in events. And the value is the value of that target, which is this value, which is what the user has been editing. So we're going to do that. And then the index here, we know to value. And then we know the index is 0. OK? So let's see here. I'm having some issues with the size of my font. We can play. Oh, I'm missing a brace. Live coding, everybody. OK, so there we have it. So we have this event. We're going to call set digit at index. And now what we should see is if I come in here, I should be able to change this value, but I will not be able to change this value, okay? Because this one hasn't been hooked up. So all we have to do here is the exact same thing, and here the exact same thing. And what we're going to do is set this to 1 and set this to 2. Now we have all of our boxes should be working. There we go. Now, there's one other piece that we want to do here, which is let's say that we want to have a password. So let's say if our secret password is 223. Let's put the default values back to zeros. Okay, so the default values of these boxes are going to be zeros. The secret password that they're looking to get to is 223. And what I need to do is I need to get we're going to make a way to check whether the password that's entered, the digits that are entered match the password, OK? So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a for loop. And just a straightforward for loop over an array. And we're not doing a lot of error checking here and things along those lines. We're going to kind of bypass that. So basically, if the password and the digits in place don't match, we are going to just return. Otherwise, we are going to basically do an unlock, okay? So what we want to do is add a new piece of state. So what we want to do is represent that this current thing is locked, right? It's locked or unlocked. And we need to represent that. And how do we represent pieces of information about what we're building? We use state. So let's do an is unlocked and a set is unlocked. Now, some of you may have been doing some trainings and you're like, ooh, I don't know if we should be using Boolean state properties like this. We'll get there. We're going to use state false. So by default, we are locked, and then eventually we'll become unlocked. And so here, if the passwords don't match, we just return. But if the passwords do match, then after the end of this for loop, we can set is unlocked true. Okay, does that follow to everybody? So here we have a for loop. As long as every digit in password and digits match, we'll set is unlocked true. Otherwise, we'll just return. Why do you use let instead of const when useState is kind of immutable? That's a great question. To be perfectly honest, I'm not entirely sure off the top of my head, but I know that this is definitely a convention. That's a great question. If anybody else knows the answer, please feel free to answer that. I know generally speaking, like some people have really given up on const overall. I still hold to it sometimes, but I know for sure this is a convention. And with some things with hooks, the conventions are quite strong and maybe even enforced sometimes as far as implementation. So you definitely want to stick to the conventions where the conventions matter. Okay, so we know that we can set the unlock true when we check the passwords, and we know that we can determine whether or not something is unlocked. But what will make that determination? What will cause all this to happen? Well, the logical thing would be the button. So we'll come down to this button, and we'll say on click. And again, we're going to do the braces to say that we're going to define a piece of execution here. And we're going to say on click, check password, boom. Okay, and so every time you click this button, it's going to run this command against this method, and it's going to possibly set is unlocked. Now, how will we know if it works? Well, we won't. So let's do that now. So what do we want to do here is we're going to execute a piece of code, and I'm going to write it first, and then I'll explain what it's doing. So we're going to do is unlocked, and we're going to do double ampersand, and we're going to do a piece of JSX. So we're going to do unlocked. Okay? So look at this. This is kind of interesting. Now, we're in this section of plain JSX, and all of a sudden we have some braces because, why? We're evaluating this as, do they really use const in the hook stocks? Let's see. I have the hook stock open. They do? Oh, they do. Well, look at that. Boom. Updated. There you go. You can be given a training and be up to date. Look at that. Boom. Const in there. I could have sworn that's not what I see elsewhere, but fair enough. We got it. The app would have run either way, but it's good to be up to date with the documentation. Thank you very much. Okay. So here's what we're doing. We're evaluating some JavaScript, and what we're saying is that if unlocked is false, you're going to end up getting basically nothing to output here. But if unlocked is true, then we're going to actually return the result of this, which is this piece of JSX, which is unlocked. So what we should see now is if we move this to 2, this to 2, and this to 3, we should now see the message. We didn't see the message. Uh-oh. Password.length. Oh, I bet I know what's going on. Yep. I knew I was going to fall prey to this. Okay, one other thing. This value here, even though it's set to a number type, is actually a string. So we need to actually parse this value as a number, excuse me. Save that. Now, I should expect that when I see 2 and 2 and 3, unlocked. Ta-da! It works. So we now have a bit of a locking mechanism and some text, which is now unlocked by that locking mechanism. Very cool. I'll take a second here to take a drink. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is I actually want to create something a little bit better than an input box. So I don't want people to put in arbitrary numbers. I actually want people to put in something that looks a little bit like a spin lock on a briefcase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new div here in this place, and I'm going to style it, right? So we're going to do style, and remember, style is an object, and that's going to be a display of flex. And here we're going to do flex direction is column. Look at that. And so flex direction is column. Now look at flex direction is got this interesting new nomenclature because we're not doing flex direction, we're doing flex direction. So you have to be mindful of this with React when you're using inline styles, that you're naming things appropriately. Generally speaking, all those kebabs are going to turn into these capitalized situations, but just a heads up on that. And then I'm going to do a text align center. I think I'm going to do a width of 48 pixels. Now, do you need to do this stuff that I'm doing right now? No, but I'm just sort of giving it a bit of a look. And inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 buttons. And I'm going to do a button minus and a button plus. And then in the middle here, I'm going to show digits 0. Okay, so now what we should get is something that looks a little bit like a little lock on a briefcase. Okay? And if I want to, I can just do that twice. And I have this 1 and 2. And now I should see those numbers. And again, if I go up and I change this to 3, 4, and 5, I should see all that update. Okay. So we've done that. Now, I'm going to delete these input boxes because now we're going to move on from them. So thank you, input boxes. You've served your purpose. And now we need to figure out what to do with these buttons to change, because again, we're back to the same problem of needing to change our state. And as far as changing our state goes, I'm going to create 2 new methods. I'm going to call the first one increment, which will take an index. It's going to do something, and we're going to do decrement. And index, and it's going to do something. Now, this isn't uniquely React in any way, but I want to show what this is. So here, what we're doing is we're coming up with a new digit. Now, what is the new digit? It's the digit at the given index plus 1, because we're incrementing. And then we are doing a mod 10. And all this means is that it's going to stop it from going to 11 and 12 and 13. It's going to stick between 0 and 9. I think. Yeah, it's going to go between 0 and 9. And so then we're going to do set digit at index then, and we're going to do new digit and index, okay? So here we are incrementing that value, the value at that index by 1, and we're bounding it to 0 to 9. Now here with decrement, we're doing a similar thing, but here we need to kind of be a little bit weirder. I'm sure there might be a code golf way to do this, but here's what I came up with: digits index minus 1 or 9. So the way we're doing the wraparound is we're just checking. If it's greater than 0, we're just going to subtract 1. If it's not greater than 0, then we're going to set it to 9. That'll cause the wraparound. 3-digit index. Okay, so we have our increment and our decrement. Yeah, I think we're going to send a link to the completed code, but this video will be available afterwards, so you can rewind. I think you can rewind because it's on YouTube. You can rewind right now, but we'll miss you, so don't leave. Okay, so we're going to come in here, and now what we're going to do is do an on-click for the buttons, and we don't really care about the event. Now, theoretically, this argument would take the event, but we don't need it for the purposes of what we're doing. We're just going to call increment 0, and all of the plus buttons are going to do this. So we're going to do 1 there and 1 there, but of course, oops, I should actually put it in the button. But this will be 2, and this will be 1. And this will be the same thing, but we're going to replace it with decrement. oops, and then update this to 1 and this to 2. Okay. So here we go. Now we have these buttons. Now, theoretically, these should go up to 9 and then wrap back around. Or I could go down and they'll wrap back around. Okay, so we're good. And if I set this to 2 and to 2 and to 3, and I press this, I'm still unlocked. So we've restored our functionality, but we've replaced those sort of sloppy input boxes with some really cool spin locks. We're doing really good. Yeah, all the courses will be on the YouTube channel permanently, I think. Okay, so the next thing is, you might notice that I did a lot of copy pasting there. I did a lot of copy pasting, I did a lot of changing of values, and in a couple of cases, I forgot to change the values. So I ended up making some errors. So this is where we're going to start introducing the concept of components. So we're going to say, what if I wanted to say, instead of having 3 of the exact same copied HTML, CSS stuff here, what if I wanted instead to create a new component? And what if that component is just going to be called a spin lock digit, okay? And it itself is a function that's just going to return something. What might it return? Well, it might return this. So we're going to have this function return this fragment of JSX, okay? And voila, we have our first component. Now, you might notice that Visual Studio Code is having some issues with me right now. It doesn't like some of the stuff. It's missing stuff, right? So in this case, it's missing this increment and this decrement function. And what I want to do here is I need to get those values from somewhere, right? React has this concept of the unidirectional data flow. When you're going to use a component and it doesn't have the data it needs, it has to get it from its parent. And if it gets the data from its parent, it's not allowed to change it. It has to tell the parent to change it for him. So what do I need here? Well, of course, I need a digit. And so all components take implicitly a props argument. So we could define certain things to be on the props object. Or you can do this trick, which a lot of people do, which is they dereference the props. Now, you could do props here and then say, dereference them here. You can do that here. Or you can call props dot. You can do whatever you want. I like to do it in the actual arguments array. So I'm dereferencing something called props. And in here, we know we're going to maybe need something called digit. And we're going to maybe need to have an on-change handler, right? Because I'm going to get a digit, and then someone's going to click a button that's going to want to increment that digit, and I need to signal that. So I'm going to just show this digit here. So that's easy to replace. But what am I going to do here? I need to know to increment or to decrement. So what I'm going to say we're going to do is I'm going to take this new digit and bring it up from the increment function, and I'm going to take this new digit and I'm going to bring it up from the decrement function. And I'm going to call this the increment digit, and I'm going to call this the decrement digit. And here I need to replace this with digit, and replace this with digit, and replace this with digit. Okay, so now we're using our props to redefine these concepts of what it would mean to increment and what it would mean to decrement. And then I need to change this to on change. And I don't need the index. I don't even know what an index means. I don't know why there would be more than one of me. So all I know is that I changed, and somebody wanted to change me to the increment digit. And here someone wanted to change me to the decrement digit. Okay? So I'm defining how I change that number. You give me a number, I tell you how I changed it. I could do it with spin wheels, I could do it with input boxes, I could do it however I want. But here I'm doing it in this way, this little spin lock. And that's how this works. So now if I come down here, and again, I take this code, and I say I can use my component just like this, spin lock digit, and then I have to pass it a digit. That digit is going to be digits 0. And then its on change is going to be a method. It's going to call change digit, change, what do I call it? Oh, set digit, sorry, set digit. Set digit at index, and it's going to be, this change is going to take a new digit. And here it's going to take new digit and 0. And it's an empty thing. So here we're going to take 2 things here. And this is 1 and this is 2. This is 1 and this is 2. And now if I delete this, I should notice in the world's most boring change in live coding, nothing changed. And if nothing changes, then it's working just fine with our new component, right? So I replaced that repetitive code with a component, which I isolated out. And I said, hey, I'm going to reuse this a lot. It's going to differ a little bit, but it's going to behave the same way. And so I've encapsulated that HTML, maybe some styling, some CSS, and also some behavior into this component. And now I can just reuse this component here. Or if you want to get even fancier, we can do arbitrary, again, JS operations. And we can say digits.map, okay? And this is going to take a digit and an index. And here I can say, give me a spin lock digit whose digit is digit and whose on change is new digit, set digit at index, new digit, index. I'm off. No, I'm off. Oh. I need to actually close off my thing. And then close that. Oh, it doesn't want me to put this brace in here. Okay. So now I can just arbitrarily run a map operation, and that's fine too. Okay. So I have this now, and I can do this, right? So I can do that. And so that's what's so cool about React and JSX is that I can kind of mix my templating with my JavaScript and do operations like map. So now I just have this all down to one single line where I'm taking the array of digits and I'm displaying those on the screen. And again, they should behave just fine. Now, this is, interestingly, now complaining about a key prop, and we're just not going to have enough time to get into this. But suffice it to say, if you get that warning or that error, you can just make the index the key. That's not always good. In fact, it's seldom good if you can avoid it, but it'll make that warning disappear. Okay, so here we are. So now we're going to get to the last part because I promised dad jokes, and we're really coming down to it already even. And what I want to do is bring in the concept of a message. So we have this unlocked message now. Now we're going to extract that out to its own component, and so that we can play around with it a little bit. And so we're going to have this component, which I'm going to call the grand reveal. Okay, and that grand reveal is going to take this piece of code and return it. So it's going to return this. Now it doesn't have to have these braces since it's not actually executing. It's not actually in JSX right now. But so what it's going to return is basically nothing if is unlocked is false, and it's going to return something. It's going to return unlocked if it's true. But what is unlocked? It doesn't know. Aha, which means if it doesn't know, it must be coming from its parent. So we're going to make a variable. We're actually going to call it isOpen instead of isUnlocked because it doesn't know what it means to be locked or unlocked. It just knows whether it's open or not. And so here we have this isOpen property. So now we're going to go here, and we're going to add that reveal message back in, the grand reveal. And isOpen is going to equal isUnlocked. Okay. And so now again, I should be back to where I was, that if I do that, I'm open again, right? So this is this process of refactoring, of making components to make code a little easier and a little bit, a little smoother to work with. But again, I promised dad jokes. Where are these dad jokes coming from? So these dad jokes are coming from ICANN has dad joke. And they have some documentation here for their API. And I'm not going to get too deeply into it, but I want to show everyone what it can do. So here we're bringing in or not bringing in, but we're using the fetch API to contact ICANN has dad joke and ask it to send us back JSON. We're interpreting that result as JSON. We're pulling the joke because if you look, what it'll return is a joke, an object that has a joke in it. We'll pull out that joke piece, and then we're going to here set this global variable message to be joke. Now this is, y'all, this is not good. This is not what we should do, and we're going to quickly unwind this, but I'm going to show you what might happen if we do this. If we give it sufficient time to hit the server and back, which let's see if it's finished. It did, it finished. And I do this, it is showing our dad joke. But this is not a good piece of code, right? This fetch code is activating when this file is loaded. It's not waiting until this thing is shown. It's not being diligent or smart about what it's doing. It's literally executing when this code is first opened. This is not a way to build an application. You don't want to reference global variables that aren't constants inside your React application. This will not work, okay? In the future, you'll have all sorts of problems. But I want to show it because it's our first step. We actually get the data down from the server. Now what I want to do is I want to show you what it would be like to get this in, okay? So we need to pull in something which is an effect. So this is a different type of hook. It's called use effect. And basically what we want to do in words is when this component is basically built, when this component is brought into being, when it exists, okay, we want to perform an action. And that action is fetching the dad joke, okay? So the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to store the dad joke. Right now it's in message. We don't want that. So we want const dad joke, set dad joke. Okay, so this is just our sets, our use state, our use state stuff. So it'll be empty by default. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do a use effect. A use effect takes a method, and it's a little bit complicated to fully explain kind of everything that's going on here. But essentially, effects are things that happen after your component has rendered. After your component has rendered, React goes through and calls all the effects, and it determines which of them need to be recalled because the things they depend on have changed, and which ones don't because nothing has changed that would affect them. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one that is only going to execute once, the very first time that this component is basically built. And to do that, we are going to just move this code into this method. Okay. So that takes care of the basics, but here we were setting message to joke. That's not what we want to do. Here we want to do set dad joke, right? Because we want to store it locally. And we want to set it to joke, okay? So here, when the data comes back from the server, we want to set it to dad joke. And then here, we want to show dad joke. Okay, so this is all well and good, but there's one other thing that we need to do, which is that right now, this effect is going to execute every single time that this component re-renders because we haven't told it otherwise. So use effect takes this additional argument, which is an array. The array is the set of variables that, that when they change, this effect should execute again. Okay, so if I want this effect to run every time isOpen changes to get a different dad joke, we can do that. If we want it to be based on something else, we can do that. If you want it to run every time this thing re-renders, no matter what, you don't give it that array. If you don't give it that array, it'll always re-execute. But then you're hitting the server over and over and over and over and over again. You don't need that. We only need one dad joke. So we're going to do an empty array, which says this thing executes once and it'll never execute again. Okay? Now, if we save this and I get rid of my global message variable, again, as with everything in this application, it should be refreshing. So there you go. What did the celery say when he broke up with his girlfriend? She wasn't right for me, so I really don't care at all. Ooh, that one's really bad. That's really bad. Let's get another one. I hate perforated lines. They're terrible. Okay, so here's our React application. Now, there's one other thing that I want to show really quickly. We're basically right at time, but there's one other thing that I wanted to show real quickly, and that is, what if we wanted to show how many times they've failed at unlocking this thing, okay? And so to do that, of course, we would need another piece of state, and that state is going to be num tries and set num tries, and we're going to do a use state of 0 by default, right? They haven't failed. And here, we're going to go down to the check password. And before we return here, we're going to do set num tries. And again, this state change is going to depend on the previous state. So we use the argument version. the method version that takes the current num tries. And we're going to return current num tries plus 1. Okay, so we're just incrementing the number of tries. And that's all well and good. And then what we want to do is come down here before the grand reveal, and we're going to put a p tag here. And this p tag is going to say, this p tag is going to say if, we're going to have two things execute. So the first thing is if we're not unlocked, so if we're locked and number of tries is greater than 0, so they've tried to unlock it more than once, then I'm going to show a p tag, which says you have tried to unlock this num tries times. Okay. So here, look at, we're writing a p tag, and even in the text, we can choose to tell React to execute some JavaScript. And so if we save this, then if I try to see this, now it's breaking. Okay. Now, on the flip side, we can do, again, something like if it is unlocked, and we don't need this, then maybe we say, unlocked, just to really let you know that, okay? Now, the reason why I wanted to show this example is, again, just to show you that building React applications, at least at the beginning, just is like this. It's just using these very rudimentary building blocks, one cool idea at a time, and then like, oh, look, I'm repeating myself. I can extract that to a component. I can, oh, another piece of state. I could do something really interesting, right? And so now if I do 2, 2, 3, not only will I get my, why did the teddy bear say no to dessert? Because she was stuffed. But I can do this. Now, the last thing that I want to show you guys is one of the biggest things that gets people in React, and that is this idea of class name. You can use CSS just like anything else, right? You don't have to do inline styles. Don't take this this to mean that you have to use inline styles. You don't. You can use CSS. You can use classes. You can use IDs. You can connect to tags exactly like you can in CSS. That does not change. But if you're going to use classes, you don't actually use the class attribute. In React, it's the class name attribute. This one thing drives so many people crazy. And it slips you up. You will make mistakes here. You're wondering why your styles aren't applying. It's because you use class instead of class name. The error handling here is actually really good. You will get messages about this kind of stuff. But what we're going to do is this. You're not going to notice any differences in the styling because, interestingly enough, we haven't actually included the styles. So in React, it can be with Create React App. This is not default React, but this is the build system that Create React App gave us. I can just import my CSS file. And when I do that, now it's going to say, oh, it's because it's in the same folder. When I do that, now it's imported that CSS file. So when the build system worked, it goes, oh, this piece of CSS, it's not wasted CSS. It's actually necessary for this component that I'm trying to show. So I'm going to load it. And so now if I do this, I have this. And if I do this, ta-da, unlocked. OK. So, it's really hard to show React in 1 hour. But I hope that you guys feel confident now being able to kind of take the tools that we used here. These are the rudimentary tools of building applications. Like I said, do this locally in your environment. Go onto Code Sandbox, execute it there, whatever you need to do. And you can actually build really cool websites and get them deployed. Oops. So that's basically what I have for today. If you come back in future weeks, we're going to talk about Gatsby. We're going to talk about how to actually take what we've built at a place like this, piece of code, and get it deployed to Netlify. Just know, or sites like Netlify, just know that there's lots of documentation about how to deploy your application that work directly with Create React application. So we would only be a few clicks away, a couple minutes away from getting this actually deployed on the internet so that you could actually see it and give it to your friends and share it and things like that, using Netlify, Firebase, GitHub pages, anything along those lines. OK. So that is basically what we have for you. Again, thank you so much for coming to this session. There are more sessions today. So we have Angular coming up later. We have Vue. We have web performance. And we have RxJS to round out the day. Today is a lot of intro. So it's all the 1 hour to learn. So just stay with us all day. You can learn all the frameworks. But if you are looking for any corporate training that's in line with some of the things that you saw here today, or you wanted to go more in depth, or you think that it would benefit your company, please feel free to reach out to us at hi@thisdot.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment and have a talk. So thank you so much, everybody. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to me on Twitter at RoboCell. I'd be happy to go over anything that I discussed here, and we'll make sure that there's maybe links to the code, and certainly you'll see this video on YouTube going forward if you need to rewind and go over things again. So thank you, and we'll see you all back in about a half hour for the next training.